Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you today from Tokyo Video Gamers here in Akihabara, the best place in town to go if you want to get a beer and play some free arcade games. And today I have your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Ganbare Goemon 2 for the Super Famicom. This is a 1993 release that was developed and published by Konami, and it is a direct sequel to The Legend of the Mystical Ninja on the SNES, and if you played and enjoyed that game, then you'd definitely like this game too, because it does what any good video game sequel should. It takes what was great about the first game and improves upon it in pretty much every way. It's once again a two-player co-op action platformer, and you get to play as returning characters Goemon and Ebisumaru, as well as a new playable character to the series, a mechanical ninja named Sasuke, who appeared as a boss character in the first game. All three characters have their own unique weapons that vary in range and attack strength, and they also vary in speed and jumping ability, but they're all fun to play as, and for the most part, this is a pretty straightforward platformer that features some fantastic level design, a wide variety of enemies, lots of vehicles to make use of, and it is very challenging. I actually think this is definitely one of the better action platformers on the Super Famicom, all things considered, and the fact that it features co-op gameplay is just icing on the cake. You can, of course, enjoy this game as a single-player experience, and it's really fun regardless if you're playing with one or two players, but this game also features a lot of fun mini-games that are definitely better with two players. Aside from the platforming stages, there are also sections of the game where you'll jump into a giant Goemon mech suit named Impact to roller skate your way to a boss battle while destroying everything in your path, eventually going one-on-one with other giant mech suits, which is very cool. Everything is connected via an overworld map, similar to Mario World and DK Country, and between stages you can visit towns to buy power-ups, play mini-games, and earn more money. Overall, this is an A+ action platformer in my opinion that any fan of the genre should give a try, and in terms of graphics and sound, it is a big step up from the first game, with some fantastic visuals that take full advantage of the 16-bit hardware, and a great soundtrack that is upbeat, catchy, and has a distinctly Japanese sound to it. Definitely, if you enjoyed the first game, or if you like 16-bit platformers in general, Ganbare Goemon 2 on the Super Famicom is a must-play. It's awesome. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Trizeal for the Sega Dreamcast. This is a 2005 release that was developed by Triangle Service, and it is a port of the 2004 arcade original. It was later re-released for the PS2 under the Shooting Love label, and an updated version called Trizeal Remix was released for Steam in 2016. This is a very simple and straightforward shooter, which is typically how I like them. It doesn't really feature too many gimmicks to the gameplay, just shoot down everything that appears on screen and collect power-ups to increase your attack strength and point bonuses. You have a fire button and a super bomb, and aside from that, you can swap back and forth between 3 different forms that change your fire mode. In one form, you have a basic Vulcan machine gun that powers up to be a very effective spread shot, a second form that gives you an arsenal of homing missiles, and a third form that gives you a powerful laser shot that also has a machine gun to go with it when you power up a bit. A big part of the gameplay is swapping back and forth to use the best weapon for each situation. So if there are a ton of smaller enemies filling the screen, you're better off using your spread shot and homing missiles, but for bigger enemies and bosses, your more powerful laser weapon comes in handy, and again, you also have a limited supply of super bombs that clear all bullets from the play area and deal a ton of damage to anything unfortunate enough to be on the screen. The appeal of this game for me is the simple gameplay. I'm not such a big fan of some Dreamcast shooters like Ikaruga, for example, that rely heavily on a gameplay gimmick. that for me is more frustrating and distracting than it is fun most of the time. Here it's just straightforward shooting action, and the challenge comes from the sheer amount of enemies and bullets that you'll contend with. It's very challenging and very fun. The graphics really aren't anything to write home about, honestly. They too are very simple, but they get the job done, and the soundtrack is quite good. It actually kinda reminds me of the soundtrack from Border Down, which is definitely a good thing. The Dreamcast version also features several gameplay modes to enjoy, and a few different display modes, and overall this is just a very enjoyable shooter that I feel doesn't get the love it deserves, mostly because it's overshadowed by the myriad of other great shooters on the console. But if you're a fan of the genre and you haven't tried it yet, Trizeal is definitely worth your time. Check it out. Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers right here in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Mad Panic Coaster for the PlayStation. This is a 1997 release that was developed and published by a company called Hakusho, which, if you look them up now, they're described as an advertising and public relations company, but I guess they decided to dip their toes into the gaming world at some point, and the end result is Mad Panic Coaster, a very 90s game that you'll probably either love or hate. I myself falling into the love it category. This game can best be described as an on-rails action shooter, even though your roller coaster cart is not actually on any rails. This game is broken down into 5 different areas, like the Mad Island and the Mad City, and each area has a handful of courses to complete, which is accomplished when you make 3 laps around the course, which is way easier said than done for 2 main reasons. One being that each course has lots of creatures and obstacles ready to drain your health and send you flying off the course, and the other reason being that this game moves at a blistering pace, and every course will have you going around lots of tricky twists and turns, as well as jumping all around to avoid pitfalls and obstacles. As fast as the gameplay is, it thankfully features some fairly tight controls, so you are at least well equipped to navigate the courses, and you can apply a brake if things get a little too fast for your liking. And for the enemies, you are able to fire off an explosive ball to get them out of your way. It's a very fast-paced and frantic gaming experience, totally living up to its title, and I personally find it to be very fun. It's a great pick-up-and-play game with very simple controls and objectives. Capping off the wild gameplay is an elaborate visual style that is mostly comprised of scaling 2D sprites and a wide variety of environments and enemies, but one thing remains constant, and that's the comical horror motif throughout the game, with tons of zombies, monsters, and spooky locations to speed through. And complementing the gameplay and graphics is a soundtrack that is comprised entirely of very 90s style skater punk that'll undoubtedly remind you of bands like Offspring and NoFX, and it is absolutely perfect for the gameplay, visuals, and overall style this game is going for. So while it's not exactly a gaming masterpiece, so to speak, fun and simple gameplay, entertaining and elaborate visual design, and a rockin' soundtrack make Mad Panic Coaster a game that is well worth playing. Check it out. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Astra Superstars for the Sega Saturn. This is a 1998 release that was developed and published by Sunsoft, who had kind of a mixed track record with fighting games. They also developed Galaxy Fight, which isn't so great, but they did develop Waku Waku 7, which is really good. So I went into Astra Superstars with a little bit of reservation, but I was pleasantly surprised by this one. It is a lot of fun, though I probably should have already said this is not the game to play if you suffer from epilepsy, because it is insanely colorful and the screen will flash like a strobe light when pulling off super attacks. This is a 2D fighter, but it's unique in that it takes place entirely in the air. You're still fighting on a 2D plane, but you can also maneuver above and below your opponent to attack them from different angles or take their back. You're given 8 playable characters to choose from, and they all vary quite a bit both in visual design and in their array of attacks, and the controls here are exceedingly simple. You have 6 attack buttons, and instead of traditional special moves, this game encourages combining your attacks into combos, which can be pretty elaborate, often sending your opponent bouncing all around the screen like a pinball, which leaves them vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Also, you have a super combo meter that fills up as you land attacks, and super combos are executed simply by pressing 2 buttons at the same time. There are several gameplay modes to choose from, including a story mode that presents you with conversations between you and your opponents before each match, and depending on what responses you choose, the fight can be a little easier or a little more difficult, and overall this is a very fun fighting game. It was a little awkward for me at first, but once I got used to the controls, I was having a great time. Again, it's a unique fighting game experience and very easy to get the hang of. You'll be pulling off some ridiculous combos in no time and melting your retinas at the same time, because like I said, this game is insanely colorful, and I absolutely love the visual design here, but all of the flashing can be a little straining on the eyes after a while. Really great character and stage designs though, and the soundtrack is really good too. There are some very catchy tracks here that perfectly match the flashy visuals and frantic gameplay. So while it's definitely no Street Fighter 03, it's certainly a fighter like no other on the Saturn, and one fighting fans definitely should give a try. It's Astra Superstars, and it's blinding. I mean, awesome. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Crisis Force for the Famicom. This is a 1991 release that was developed and published by Konami, and if you're a fan of some of their NES shooters like Gradius and Life Force and shoot-'em-ups in general really, then you should love this game, because it is, in my opinion, probably the best shooter on the console, or at least in the top 3. It features a pretty interesting plot for a shooter. Instead of battling against alien invaders, you're fighting off ancient beings from the lost city of Atlantis, and likewise, you're piloting an ancient ship called the Aura Wing, designed specifically to defeat them. This is a vertically scrolling shooter that has a lot in common with games like Gun Knack and Star Soldier, but has enough unique qualities to set it apart from those. For starters, you have 2 main weapons, a linear shot that is obtained by collecting blue weapon power-ups, and a winding shot that comes with the red power-up. And by collecting multiple power-ups of the same color, your weapon increases in strength, and you also have a limited supply of super bombs. One very cool feature in this game is that when you collect 5 of the blue gem power-ups that certain enemies leave behind, you transform into what can be best described as sort of a phoenix-looking ship that is basically unstoppable and annihilates everything on the screen. You can only be in this form for a limited time, but by collecting more power-ups, you extend your time, and if you're playing in co-op, both ships will combine into one, making both players basically invincible for the duration. One other cool feature in Crisis Force is the ability to swap back and forth between 3 different forms, which allow you to fire in various directions, which is very nifty, as enemies will appear from all sides of the screen as the game progresses. Overall, this is a fantastic 8-bit shooter, again, one of the best on the console, with some very fun and challenging gameplay, and the graphics and sound are also some of the best the console has to offer. Konami specifically wanted this game to push the Famicom hardware to its limits by using their in-house developed VRC4 chip, and the result is some bright, beautiful visuals, multiple scrolling layers, high-speed gameplay, and some huge boss sprites. It's a great looking game, and the soundtrack is just as impressive, with some top quality music that Konami always had a knack for including in their games. Definitely, if you're a shooter fan, and more specifically a Konami shooter fan, Crisis Force on the Famicom is a must-play. It's awesome.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Gear Fighter Dendoh for the PlayStation.
This is a 2001 release that was developed and published by Bandai, and it's based on a fairly short-lived anime series about two boys who pilot a giant mech suit to defend the Earth from a race of sentient alien machines, while at the same time trying to recover what's referred to as data weapons, basically big animal robots that can help them out in combat. This game is, for the most part, a side-scrolling 2D beat-em-up, and when I say side-scrolling, I do mean just that. Think less Final Fight and more Ninja Warriors. You take control of the title mech suit to beat the hell out of hordes of other giant robots, and though the controls here are extremely simple, basically just attack and jump, you can perform a number of cool special attacks by either charging the attack button, combining it with directional buttons, or entering some Street Fighter style commands, which adds a nice bit of variety. And there are also weapons scattered around to make use of, which are perfect for bludgeoning. For boss battles, the game will often take a break from the beat-em-up gameplay for a little 3D fighting action, which is admittedly a bit clunky, but still pretty fun. And as you progress through the game, you will obtain the aforementioned data weapons, which can be used to perform some powerful screen-clearing super attacks in the beat-em-up stages, or give you a special weapon to use for the boss battles. There's even a flying stage further along in the game to add just a little more in the way of variety. Overall, while I certainly don't think this is the best beat-em-up ever made or anything, I was pleasantly surprised with how fun it is. It's just a good old-fashioned beat-em-up with a few special moves and giant animal robots thrown in for good measure. The graphics and sound aren't really anything to get too excited about, but the visuals do at least represent the source material pretty well, and there are some pretty cool looking super moves and flashy effects to enjoy, and the soundtrack is pretty generic. Nothing here I'd call memorable, but for a fairly mindless game based on an anime I'd never heard of from the early 2000s, I've got no complaints really. If you're a beat-em-up fan looking for something new to try out, you can do a lot worse than Gear Fighter Dendoh on the PlayStation. Check it out.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Keio Flying Squadron 2 for the Sega Saturn.
This is a 1996 release that was developed and published by Victor Entertainment, and it's the sequel to the original Keio Flying Squadron on the Sega CD, and this is one of the rare occasions that I feature a game that actually was released outside of Japan, as this game did get a limited release in PAL regions. But even though this is an expensive game, if you pick up the Japanese version, it's nothing compared to how prohibitively expensive its European counterpart is, so I am perfectly happy to feature it here, as it's the version you'd more than likely want to have in your collection. It once again features Rami Nana Hikari as your playable character, in pursuit of 6 magical orbs that have wish-granting properties. Unlike the first game, which was a side-scrolling shoot-em-up, and a pretty good one I might add, This game is mostly a 2D platformer, though there are a couple of shooter stages that more or less play the same as those in the first game. The platforming here is pretty solid, and you have a couple of methods for dispatching enemies. You can do the standard head bounce, which also serves as a springboard maneuver, but you can also pick up a variety of weapons like a hammer or parasol to attack enemies with, and the weapons are also useful because they give you an extra hit point. You die in one hit if you're not holding one. Each stage offers up a variety of enemies and stage hazards, and there's even a roller coaster stage that reminds me a bit of the minecarts from Donkey Kong Country, which is pretty cool. There are also lots of boss battles included in this game, which are usually more comedic than anything, but still entertaining, and overall this is a pretty easy game as far as platformers go, but it does offer up a bit of challenge here and there, and overall I found the platforming to be plenty satisfying and fun. The shoot-'em-up stages are also really fun, and again, they're very similar to the previous game. I just wish there were more of them. There are only 2 shooter stages in the entire game, and they're spaced pretty far apart from each other. A couple more would have been greatly appreciated. Gameplay aside, the other big selling points for this game are the wacky and colorful visuals and characters, and the equally wacky soundtrack. This is a beautiful game with some very detailed stage designs that vary quite a bit from one another, but mostly keep a general Japanese vibe, and the same can be said for the characters. Lots of comical designs that maintain a distinctly Japanese look, as well as some fully animated cutscenes sprinkled throughout the game, and an enjoyable soundtrack that sounds like a mix of something you'd hear in a Ganbare Goemon game and your Saturday morning cartoon. So with all of that taken into consideration, the fun gameplay, the colorful visuals, and the stellar soundtrack, Keio Flying Squadron 2 is a fantastic game that Sega Saturn fans shouldn't miss. Check it out.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Under Defeat for the Sega Dreamcast.
This is a 2006 release that was developed and published by G-Rev, the same developer as Border Down, another Dreamcast favorite of mine, and it's a port of the 2005 arcade original, and at the time of its release, it was promoted as the final Dreamcast game, even though ultimately it wasn't, and this was the only way to play this game at home until it got an HD re-release on the PS3 and Xbox 360 in 2012. It's set in an alternate universe during the World War II era, and has you playing as German chopper pilots fighting against invading forces, and features vehicles and weapons modeled after actual World War II weapons of war. This is one of my favorite shooters on the Dreamcast, and mostly I love it for the simple and straightforward gameplay that makes it feel like an updated version of classics like Tiger Heli and Twin Cobra. It's a vertically scrolling shooter that plays at more of an isometric view sometimes, and your helicopter can fire in 3 directions, so it's not quite as maneuverable as the choppers in Zero Gunner, but it does allow you to come at your enemies from a variety of angles. You cannot power up your main weapon in this game. Instead, you have a selection of 3 different assist weapons to pick up at any time that include a machine gun, rockets, and a super grenade, and when they are deployed, they will automatically home in on enemies. They're extremely useful, but once fired, they need a little time to recharge before they can be fired again, so knowing when and where to use them most effectively is a big part of clearing this game. Finally, you also get a super bomb, which is one of my favorites from any shoot 'em up, as it's basically a carpet bombing of the entire screen, and it is very satisfying. Overall, this is a very fun and challenging shooter that controls well, throws a ton of enemies at you, including some epic boss battles, and it's even more fun with a second player. Again, it's definitely one of my favorite Dreamcast shooters, which is saying a lot, and in addition to the stellar gameplay, this game sports some decent visuals, nothing mind-blowing to be honest, but it does represent the World War II motif very well, and I do like the wide variety of enemy vehicles, and the explosion effects are great. The soundtrack is also very good, lots of great tunes to get you into the action, which is pretty standard for G-Rev. They always had some great music in their games, and again, those explosions don't just look good, they also sound good. Some truly awesome sound effects in this game. So if you're a shooter fan and you haven't played Under Defeat yet on the Dreamcast or otherwise, then do yourself a favor and play this one ASAP. It is awesome.
Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers right here in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Advanced Variable Geo for the PC Engine CD.
This is a 1994 release that was developed and published by TGL, and it's an updated version of the original Variable Geo that was released on the NEC PC 9800 home computer, and it was later again updated and ported to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. This series features a pretty weird plot, all things considered. The Variable Geo tournament is held to determine the strongest woman in Japan, and all of the entrants are sponsored by family restaurants where they work as waitresses. The winner of the tournament is crowned the Virgin Goddess, while losers are forced to publicly strip off their clothes to teach them the true shame of losing, though that is a concept that is explored more in the anime than in the games. This is a pretty straightforward 2D fighter that plays more or less exactly like Street Fighter II, as was the case with most fighters released at this time. You have 9 playable characters to choose from that all have a variety of fighting styles and special attacks, and you also have 3 gameplay modes to choose from: an arcade mode, versus mode, and a story mode that includes a lot of fully voiced cutscenes to move the plot along. Something this game does different from some other PC Engine fighters that make use of the 6-button controller is that it only makes use of 2 buttons, one for punch and one for kick, but you perform different attacks by either tapping or holding the button, so it plays like a 4-button fighter even though it only uses 2. Special moves are the typical Hadouken and Shoryuken button commands, and the gameplay itself is fairly smooth and responsive. This is honestly not that remarkable of a fighting game, but considering how few fighters there are on the PC Engine and how crappy some of the other ones are, I was pretty satisfied with the gameplay here. It's an enjoyable game that I was able to play through with several characters before putting it down. The visuals are also pretty good. They're not the most elaborate, as the premise has you fighting in a lot of parking lots and inside of restaurants, but this is still a fairly colorful game with some large character sprites and those classic PC Engine anime cutscenes that everybody loves so much. The soundtrack, though, is very good. Lots of catchy, high-energy music to complement the gameplay, and this is a series that would pretty much always feature some stellar soundtracks, so while it's not exactly a fighting masterpiece, fairly solid gameplay by PC Engine standards at least, coupled with some decent visuals and a great soundtrack, make Advanced Variable Geo on the PC Engine CD well worth playing for fans of the console. Check it out.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Yu Yu Hakusho Makyou Toitsusen for the Sega Mega Drive.
This is a 1994 release that was published by Sega, and it was developed by Treasure, the same company behind some absolute classics like Gunstar Heroes and Radiant Silvergun, so you know you're getting a top quality game from them, and oddly enough, this game was eventually translated into Portuguese and released in Brazil by Tectoy in 1999. It's of course based on the Yu Yu Hakusho series of manga and anime, one of my personal favorites, and it features 11 playable characters taken from various points in the series, including some kind of odd inclusions like Itsuki and Elder Toguro, but overall it's a pretty solid lineup. This is a 2D fighter, and typical of Treasure games, it's not your average fighter. You only make use of 2 attack buttons here for light and heavy attacks, and you also have a block button as well as buttons for dashing, backstepping, and jumping between 2 different planes on the screen, similar to Fatal Fury, so you will be needing a 6-button controller if you want to play this one. Each character has a selection of special attacks and super attacks lifted from the anime, and they deplete your spirit energy, which you can charge back up by holding down both attack buttons at the same time. So it's a fairly simple fighting game, and the added mechanic of moving between multiple planes shakes things up a bit, but the real draw of this game is that it supports up to 4 players at a time, and you can either fight on teams or have an all-out battle royal. This tends to get pretty intense and a little confusing at times, but it is very fun. Honestly, as a one-on-one fighter, this game is okay. It's certainly no Street Fighter 2, but when you factor in the multiplayer or the fact that you can just play against a group of CPU opponents, this becomes a unique and very enjoyable game that stands apart from other games in the genre, again typical of Treasure. In terms of visuals and audio design, this game is kind of a mixed bag. The characters do look nice enough, though the sprites are a bit small, which makes sense considering you'll be cramming 4 of them onto the screen. The environments are mostly kind of bland, with a few exceptions, and the same can be said of the soundtrack. There are a couple of really good tracks here, but mostly it's very forgettable, so while not the most impressive looking or sounding game, Makyou Toitsusen is an incredibly fun fighter, especially if you have a few friends available, and I can easily recommend it to fans of Treasure games, fans of fighting games, and fans of Yu Yu Hakusho. Check it out.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is DoDonPachi for the Sega Saturn.
This is a 1997 release that was published by Atlus, and of course, it was developed by Keio, perhaps the best known developer of bullet hell games, with titles like Death Smiles, Akai Katana, and Esperade under their belt, so anything with their name attached to it is pretty much guaranteed to be quality, and this is the second game in the series and follow-up to the original Donpachi, which itself is an amazing game, but DoDonPachi does what a good sequel should. It takes what worked about the first game, tweaks it a bit, and adds some features to make it a better game. DDP gives you 3 different ships to choose from, which is the standard for the series, and they each have varying levels of handling and maneuverability as well as different primary weapons. The red ship has a more narrow shot, the green ship has rotating turrets, and my favorite, the blue ship, has a wide spread shot. One thing they all have in common though is a concentrated laser shot that slows down their movement a bit, but packs a way bigger punch. You also have an arsenal of super bombs, but their function changes depending on how you use them. If you activate it while firing your rapid shot, it'll cause a screen-clearing explosion, but if you activate it while firing your laser, you'll instead get a powered-up super laser for a brief period, which is perfect for dealing big damage to bosses. This is a very fun shooter with buttery smooth controls, and it's also a very tough game that'll keep you playing for a while, especially if you want to see the true ending. You'll be contending with tons of enemies, bullets coming at you from every angle, and some boss battles that will really test your shooting mettle. It's one of the best shooters on the Saturn in my opinion, which is saying a lot because if there's one console with an absurd amount of great shooters on it, it's the Sega Saturn, and in addition to its great gameplay, DoDonPachi also features some very nice visuals and a great soundtrack, and You're given both the original arcade game and an updated Saturn mode to enjoy, as well as a score attack mode. So if you're a shooter fan just now getting into the Sega Saturn, this is definitely one of the first games you'll want to add to your collection. It's DoDonPachi, and it's legendary.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Street Fighter II Dash Champion Edition for the PC Engine.
This is a 1993 release that was obviously developed by Capcom and published by NEC, and it's a port of the second version of Street Fighter II that was released in arcades the previous year, and it's been said before that it's pretty amazing that this game is actually running on the PC Engine, because the console only has an 8-bit CPU with 16-bit graphics processor, so most Hue cards are at max 8 meg games, but this game is a whopping 20 megs, more than double the size of the average Hue card, and it shows because this port actually competes with its counterparts on the SNES and Sega Genesis, with a lot of people saying they actually prefer this version over those. While I myself don't really have a favorite port, I love Street Fighter II pretty much any way I can play it, not including the Tiger Electronics version, but I can see a case being made for this one, as it is a very impressive port. I mean, it's Street Fighter, so I don't really have to explain the gameplay to you, but I will say that this version controls very well, and if you enjoyed the other 16-bit home ports from the time, you'll almost definitely like this one too. I wouldn't recommend playing with the standard 2-button PC Engine controller though, as it's really awkward, similar to playing with a Genesis 3-button controller, which is a no-go. Get yourself an Avenue 6 gamepad or something similar if you want to play this one. The graphics here are really nice, again very impressive for the PC Engine to be running this, though it is noticeable that some concessions had to be made, like ditching the parallax scrolling for example, but still a very good looking game. And of course the Street Fighter II soundtrack is one of the best ever, and I do generally enjoy the music the PC Engine sound chip produces, but I feel the music here is a bit weaker than the other 16-bit versions. Overall though, this is again a great port of one of my personal favorite games ever, and if you're a PC Engine owner, Street Fighter II Champion Edition is a must-have for your collection. Check it out.
Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers right here in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Shienryu for the Sega Saturn.
This is a 1997 release that was developed and published by Warashi both in the arcade and on the Sega Saturn, and I only just now found out that it was also ported to the PS1 by Natsume and released in North America in 2002 under the title Gekyo Shooting King, and from what I can tell, it's a pretty solid conversion. If it's as good as this one, then go ahead and pick it up, because this is an awesome shoot 'em up, and kind of like Trizeal on the Dreamcast, this is a Saturn shooter that, despite being really good, I feel is underappreciated, mostly because it shares the console with some big names like Radiant Silvergun and DoDonPachi. This is a pretty simple and straightforward shooter, not a lot of gimmicks to the gameplay, and if I had to compare it to another shooter, I'd probably compare it to the Raiden series. You only have 2 buttons to worry about with this game, a fire button and a button for your super bombs, and you have various power-ups to collect to increase your speed, firepower, and point bonuses. There are 3 different colored orbs you can pick up to change your main weapon from a Vulcan machine gun to a missile barrage to an electricity shot that jumps to various targets on the screen. Each weapon is better suited to different situations, so for example, if lots of smaller enemies are filling up the screen, I like to use the electricity shot to dispatch them as quickly as possible, but for the boss battles, it's usually a better idea to have the firepower of one of the other weapons. Also, depending on what weapon you have equipped at the time, your super bomb will be altered as well, and again, they all have a different range of effectiveness. Overall, this is a very fun shooter with smooth controls and a decent level of challenge. One thing I don't like in this game is that when you lose a ship, you are stripped of your power-ups, and you're also sent back to a checkpoint unless you die fighting a boss, and this is an irritant in any shoot 'em up, but other than that, the gameplay here is very solid. The visuals are also pretty nice, the stages are colorful and detailed, there are some pretty cool effects used, and the enemy designs, especially the boss ships, look really cool. The soundtrack, I would say, is just decent, nothing memorable, but definitely not bad, and all things considered, this is a game that I can easily recommend to shooter fans, especially if you like them simple and challenging. It's Shienryu for the Sega Saturn, and it's awesome. Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers right here in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon R for the Super Famicom. This is a 1993 release that was developed and published by Bandai, and it is just one of many games released on the Super Famicom that was based on the Sailor Moon series, and while they dabbled in a few different genres, including a one-on-one fighter and several puzzle games, this one is a good old-fashioned beat-em-up that allows you to choose from all 5 of the Sailor Scouts, and there's also a mode that allows you to play as Chibiusa, aka Sailor Mini Moon. There is a plot in this game, but it's pretty thin. Basically, a bunch of Sailor Moon bad guys are causing trouble and need to have their brains beaten out by teenage girls in miniskirts aided by talking cats and a guy in a tuxedo, so it makes all kinds of sense. So, like I said, obviously this is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and though it's a very easy playthrough, it does play pretty well. It's not exactly Final Fight 3 or Turtles in Time, but if you're a fan of the genre, there's not much to complain about here. The controls are your basic attack and jump, and something pretty cool here is that each girl also has a charge attack that fires off a projectile, and of course, they each have a super attack that sacrifices a bit of health, and they each do play a little differently from one another. Some are a little faster, or maybe their projectile does a little more damage, or in the case of Sailor Jupiter, her throws are quite a bit more powerful than the other girls. It's a nice little added touch, as it would have been easy to make them all play essentially the same, and this game does feature co-op as well, which is a very welcome addition. One gripe though is that while you can pick up food items for health boosts, there are no weapon pickups to make use of, which is really a shame. I'd actually love to see Sailor Moon bashing some henchmen with a lead pipe. Still, this is a pretty fun beat-em-up that's good for a playthrough if you've got about an hour to kill. Plus, this is a pretty good-looking game, all things considered. It features some big and detailed character sprites, as well as some very colorful stages that offer up a wide variety of settings. The real weak point of the game is honestly the soundtrack. Aside from a couple of enjoyable tracks, it's pretty lame, but the sound effects are decent and the voice samples are surprisingly good. So again, while it's not exactly the best beat-em-up on the console, Sailor Moon R is still a fun and well-made game, and it's still pretty affordable these days. So if you are indeed a fan of the genre, you can do a lot worse than Sailor Moon R for the Super Famicom. Check it out.
Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Downtown Nekketsu Koushinkyoku for the Famicom. This is a 1990 release that was developed and published by Technos Japan, and it is yet another game in the Kunio-kun series, best known for games like River City Ransom and Super Dodgeball, that did not get a release outside of Japan, and it was later ported to the PC Engine CD and eventually made its way to the Wii Virtual Console in 2007 and the 3DS in 2016 as part of the Kunio-kun Nekketsu Complete Famicom Collection. This game has a lot in common with its sequel, released in North America as Crash and the Boys Street Challenge, in that it's a sports action title that has Kunio and his friends from Nekketsu High School competing against their rivals from 3 opposing schools in a series of unsanctioned sporting events. What are these sporting events, you might ask? Well, for starters, you'll be competing in a series of foot races that will take you through various locations on your way to the finish line, and these locations include city streets, rooftops, inside of people's homes, swimming through the sewers, running across conveyor belts and factories, and a whole lot more. Of course, with this being a Kunio game, you can attack your opponents at will with either your bare hands or with an assortment of weapons. The other 2 events are a pole climbing competition where you try to break open a giant ball before somebody yanks you down, and this is a very frantic affair, and of course, a straightforward fist fight with all 4 competitors trying to be the last man standing by any means necessary. This is a very simple and fun game. It's also very short, with there being so few events. It can be finished in about 30 minutes, but it does feature 4-player competitive play, and it is definitely very enjoyable while it lasts. Of course, just like with any game in the series, this one features some very colorful and detailed graphics for an 8-bit game, and some of my favorite character designs of all time. Any fan of the series will love the visuals here, and the soundtrack is once again fantastic, the type of quality you'd expect from Technos Japan. So all things considered, this is a great game with awesome visuals and sound and very fun gameplay. If you've got a Famicom collection going, definitely add Downtown Nekketsu Koushinkyoku to your want list, because it's all kinds of awesome. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Go-Go Ackman 3 for the Super Famicom. This is a 1995 release that was developed and published by Banpresto, and as the name suggests, it is the 3rd game in the Go-Go Ackman series, all of which were released exclusively in Japan. As you might have gathered from the art style, this game is based on a short-lived series of manga by Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama, and it centers around the young demon named Ackman who routinely creates trouble for humanity and steals the occasional soul. In this game, though, Ackman must team up with his heavenly rival, a young angel named Tenshi-kun, as the 2 of them must work together to bring down the corrupt leader of the Angel Police by any means necessary. So this game plays very similarly to its predecessors. It is, for the most part, a fairly straightforward action platformer, but a few changes have been made to keep the gameplay from getting too repetitive. For starters, in addition to playing as Ackman, this time around, you also get the chance to play as Tenshi-kun, who has the ability to fly and reach areas that Ackman can't, and his sections typically involve a little bit more in the way of exploration. This game also goes full Maniac mode with its weapon selection, giving you access to heavy machine guns and rocket launchers in addition to your prerequisite sword and boomerang weapons. There are also additional stages that mix things up a bit by either having you race across the screen on a speeder bike while taking out enemies, or enjoying a little bit of Mode 7 shooting action, which is always fun and looks really cool. And of course, there are plenty of boss battles that are honestly more comical than they are challenging, but still very fun nevertheless.
Overall, this is a very enjoyable platformer that I think any fan of the genre would appreciate, same as the first two games, and the icing on the cake is the awesome Akira Toriyama character designs, colorful and detailed visuals that represent the source material well, a catchy and upbeat soundtrack, and the series' trademark humor. If you are indeed a 16-bit platforming fan in need of a new title to enjoy, Go Go Ackman 3 would be a perfect choice. Check it out. Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers right here in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Nexzr for the PC Engine CD. This is a 1992 release that was published by Nexzr and it was developed by Kaneko, the same developer as other great PC Engine shooters like Aeroblasters, Heavy Unit, and Super Star Soldier, and it's been said by many shooter fans that this game is not only Kaneko's best shoot-'em-up they ever developed, but that it's high in the running for best 16-bit shooter period, and it stacks up well against anything put out by Compile, Konami, or Irem. This game features a plot that's pretty typical for a spaceship shooter, as the star pilot of the rebel resistance fighting against a futuristic space dictatorship. You climb into the cockpit of a brand new fighter ship designed specifically to take down the entire enemy empire single-handedly and exact revenge for your deceased love, who was blown to smithereens by a kick-ass red mech suit. Nothing too deep, but the cutscenes are especially cool and well executed. As far as shoot-'em-ups go, this one is exceedingly simple, which longtime viewers of the channel will know is exactly how I like them. In Nexzr, you have exactly one button to worry about aside from the D-pad, and that's your fire button. You can pick up power-ups to change your main weapon and sub-weapon, but both are activated at the same time by one button. Also, there are no super bombs and no speed boosts. What you've got is what you've got, and I love it. Instead of relying on some kind of gimmick or an excess of power-ups, this game is all about the tight controls, waves of enemies, and sometimes obstacles to dodge with very little room for error and a high level of challenge. This game can seriously kick your ass, but luckily you have infinite continues, and the checkpoints are fairly abundant, so it's not an unbeatable game. It is extremely fun and addictive though, and it plays so well that you know any deaths you suffer were most likely your own fault, but you'll definitely be back for more. Seriously though, if you love the smooth and responsive gameplay of some of Compile's better offerings, then this is a game that you'll definitely want to play. On top of that, this game looks beautiful. This is probably the best looking shooter on the console, one of the best looking games in general really, and the soundtrack is kick-ass from start to finish. So if you're a shooter fan and you haven't played Nexzr yet, rectify that situation immediately and give this game a try any way you can, because it is awesome.
Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Psychic Storm for the PC Engine CD.
This is a 1992 release that was published by Telenet Japan and developed by Alpha System, who developed a lot of games for the PC Engine, in particular a lot of shoot-'em-ups like Hyaidan 00, Violent Soldier, Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair, and the Download game, so they had a lot of experience with the genre, and Psychic Storm, I would say, is one of their stronger shooters. It's a very interesting concept, at least. In the future, the human space colonies have been overrun by alien life forms known as The Thing, and now it's up to a group of fighter pilots to take them down, starting on Earth and eventually heading out to different planets throughout the galaxy. You have 4 different ships to choose from that each have different weapon systems, and something I really like about this game is that you can change ships between each stage, which is great because some of them are better suited to different stages and bosses than others. As you play, you'll pick up power-ups to increase your offensive power, and something especially cool in this game is the ability for each ship to transform into a different mutated bioform that gives them a big power boost. It's really kind of an unfair advantage because your firepower is greatly increased. Also, as you destroy enemies in this form, they'll drop items that extend your time in your mutation, so you can conceivably play through most of the game as your ultra powerful monster form. It's not exactly the greatest shooter on the console. I don't think it holds a candle to games like Gunhead and Nexzr, but it is still really fun and features a unique gimmick to keep the gameplay fresh. Also, this is a pretty good looking game with some very imaginative stages, cool 90s anime character designs and cutscenes, and some especially nice boss designs. They're all giant Lovecraftian monsters, which I like a lot, and the stage 1 boss is the spitting image of Biollante from the Godzilla movie. The sound design is nothing to write home about though, just decent music and sound effects, but on the whole this is a solid shooter that I think is well worth playing if you're a PC Engine owner. It's Psychic Storm, and it's pretty damn cool. Hey everybody, Jim here, coming to you from Tokyo Video Gamers right here in Akihabara with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Jikkyou Oshaberi Parodius for the Super Famicom. This is a 1995 release that was developed and published by Konami, and it was later ported to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in 1996, and eventually found its way to the PSP in 2007. It's another entry into the Parodius series, which, as the name implies, are parodies of the Gradius series of shooters, up to and including the Vig Viper as a playable ship. In fact, something of note in this game is that it features a lot of playable ships from various Konami series like Twinbee and Miracle Upa, as well as a bunch of ships that are original to the Parodius games, such as ferries, a paper airplane man, and a flying octopus. They're not all just for show either. Each ship has access to a whole array of unique power-ups. So for example, if you choose the Vig Viper, you'll get the usual Gradius power-up system, but something entirely different if you're playing as one of the penguins or octopi. So there's a lot of variety here, and it's fun trying out all of the different characters. Also, for the first time in the series, this game incorporated the Bell power-ups from the Twinbee series, and these are all one-time usage and include things like a super bomb, laser cannons, or growing to giant size for a brief period. All of these cool features incorporated into what was already a solid shooter make for an especially fun game. On top of that, this is arguably one of the best looking Super Famicom games with lots of color and detail, very nice visuals, and even some 3D elements thanks to the usage of the SA1 chip to give the cartridge a big power boost. So this is a very impressive looking game for the hardware it's on, and it also features a great soundtrack and a lot of voice clips, which again is very impressive for the console. If you've got a Super Famicom and not enough good shooters to play on it, Jikkyou Oshaberi Parodius would make a great addition to your collection. Check it out.